Imagine a land of over 7,000 islands, where every wave that crashes on the shore has witnessed centuries of courage, sacrifice, and struggle. Before the world knew its name, the Philippines was already writing a story, not with pen and paper, but with the strength of its warriors, the fire of its revolutions, and the quiet bravery of those who stood for freedom. The story of the Philippines' military past begins long before flags and foreign powers. Long ago, there were brave people on these islands, tribal leaders, warriors, protectors of their families and homes. They fought for their land with tools carved by hand and hearts full of purpose. Then came centuries of change. The Spanish arrived, bringing new rules and heavy hands. But the Filipino spirit did not break. Time and again, they rose from mountain tribes to coastal towns, standing together in uprisings, dreaming of freedom. That dream burned brightest during the Philippine Revolution. People who had never known liberty before stood shoulder to shoulder and declared, "We are free." But it wasn't easy. After the Spaniards left, another power, the Americans, took their place. Once again, the Filipino soldier, the guerrilla, the farmer with a bolo in hand, had to choose to fight for their land or lose it. When World War II came, the islands became a battlefield. It was a time of pain, the Bataan Death March, the bombings, the hunger, but it was also a time of unity. Filipinos and Americans fought together, and when peace came, it came because of their shared strength, and yet, even after victory, the battles didn't end. Through the years, the military had new roles, sometimes in war, sometimes in peace. They responded to rebels, to disasters, to threats from afar, always evolving, always guarding. Today, the soldiers of the Philippines still carry that quiet duty, not just as warriors, but as peacekeepers, rescuers, protectors of sovereignty, and helpers during storms. Because you see, the story of the Philippines military is really the story of people who believe deeply in protecting something greater than themselves. And maybe, in understanding their history, we come to understand a little more about what it means to care for each other, too. Long before foreign flags were planted on Philippine soil, the islands were home to thriving communities and indigenous groups. These early societies, scattered across Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, were governed by datus, rojas, and tribal chieftains. Each group had its own customs, territories, and belief systems. And with those differences often came the need to defend, assert, or expand. Warfare during this period was not waged on a massive scale, but rather in small, localized conflicts. These battles were deeply personal and tied to honor, resources, or defense against rival communities. Warriors were trained in the art of combat, using spears, bows, arrows, and blades like the campilan and creese. Bamboo shields and native armor were used not just for war, but also for rituals and dances that celebrated warrior culture. Raiding, known as pangagam, was common among coastal groups, especially the Visayans, where bravery in battle elevated a man's status in the community. Slavery through war captives was practiced, but it came with strict codes of conduct. These early Filipinos had no standing army. Instead, warriors would be summoned during times of threat or when revenge was necessary. There was strategy, diplomacy, and alliances, sometimes sealed through marriage or trade, showing that while they were fierce, these communities were not simply violent. Their way of war was intertwined with their way of life. It was not about conquest, but survival and pride. When outside forces eventually came, these same warrior traditions would become the roots of resistance. But in these earlier centuries, the battlefield was not the world stage. It was the rivers, hills, and coastlines of the islands they called home. And the warriors who stood on those battlefields did so not for empire, but for family, community, and land. When the Spanish arrived in the Philippines in 1521, they encountered not only unfamiliar islands, but also resilient and organized local communities. Over the next 3 centuries, Spain gradually established colonial control, imposing new systems of religion, governance, and economy. The native population, however, did not accept this domination passively. Across Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, there were countless revolts and brief, some lasting decades. One of the most remarkable was the Daguhoy Rebellion in Bohol, which lasted from 1744 to 1829, the longest uprising in Philippine history. Many of these uprisings were led by local leaders who refused to surrender their people's identity and land. The resistance was rooted not just in the rejection of foreign rule, but in protest against oppressive taxation, forced labor, land grabbing, and the aggressive spread of Christianity that often disrespected native beliefs. While most revolts were eventually suppressed, they kept alive the desire for independence and nurtured a growing sense of shared struggle. In the late 19th century, this spirit crystallized into a national movement, inspired by Enlightenment ideals and the injustices suffered by Filipinos. The Katipunan was formed a secret society committed to independence. Under the leadership of figures like Andres Bonifacio and Emilio Aguinaldo, the Philippine Revolution erupted in 1896. It marked the first unified armed struggle against the Spanish colonial regime. Ordinary farmers, students, and workers took up arms, organized battalions, and engaged in battles across the islands. Though initially fragmented and facing immense odds, they gained ground and ultimately declared independence in 1898. This moment was the culmination of centuries of smaller resistances, now woven into a single call for freedom. Though the Spanish would soon be replaced by American rule, the revolution had already awakened a lasting national identity shaped through courage, blood, and an unshakable desire for self-rule. After more than 3 centuries of Spanish rule, the Filipino people finally declared independence in June 1898. However, that independence was instead of recognizing the new Republic of the Philippines, the United States, emerging as a new imperial power, signed the Treaty of Paris with Spain, which transferred control of the Philippines to the U.S. without any consultation with the Filipinos. This betrayal ignited the Philippine-American War in 1899. Filipino forces, under President Emilio Aguinaldo, initially fought in traditional battles against the well-equipped American army. Despite being outgunned, they fought with fierce determination. As defeats mounted, the war evolved into guerrilla warfare. Filipino fighters used the jungles and terrain they knew intimately, launching ambushes, sabotaging supply lines, and relying on the support of local communities. The war was brutal, with many civilian casualties and scorched earth tactics used by American forces, particularly in areas like Samar and Batangas. Villages were burned, suspected rebels were executed, and thousands of Filipinos died from both violence and disease. Aguinaldo was captured in 1901, signaling the collapse of the organized resistance. But sporadic fighting continued in some regions. While the U.S. officially declared the war over in 1902, many historians argue it lasted much longer due to ongoing uprisings and unrest. This war marked a painful transition from one colonizer to another and revealed how deeply Filipinos valued their freedom. It also gave rise to new leaders and ideologies that would influence future generations. The sacrifices made during this time became symbols of Filipino nationalism. Despite defeat, the resistance against American colonization became a foundational moment in the country's modern history, showing that independence, once tasted, could never be forgotten. The courage displayed by those who fought in this war continues to be remembered as an assertion of the Filipino people's right to self-determination. When World War II reached the Pacific, the Philippines became one of its most critical battlegrounds. In December 1941, just hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces launched their invasion of the Philippines. The country, still a U.S. Commonwealth at the time, was defended by combined American and Filipino forces under General Douglas MacArthur. Despite their courage, the defenders were quickly overwhelmed. They fell back to Botan and Corregidor, where they held out for months under grueling conditions, lacking food, medicine, and reinforcements. In April 1942, Bataan surrendered, followed by Corregidor in May. What followed was the Bataan Death March. a harrowing 65-mile forced march where thousands of Filipino and American prisoners of war died from exhaustion, starvation, and brutality at the hands of the Japanese army. During the Japanese occupation from 1942 to 1945, life in the Philippines was marked by fear, oppression, and scarcity. But resistance never stopped. Across the archipelago, guerrilla groups formed, made up of former soldiers, farmers, students, and civilians. These resistance fighters sabotaged Japanese operations, gathered intelligence, and kept the flame of freedom alive in the mountains and jungles. In some areas, entire communities supported guerrilla units, hiding them, feeding them, and helping them strike from the shadows. By 1944, American forces began their return, starting with the Battle of Leyte Gulf, one of the largest naval battles in history. Filipino guerrillas supported this campaign by attacking Japanese forces inland and guiding American troops. In early 1945, the Battle of Manila resulted in the city's liberation, but also widespread destruction and civilian loss. Over 1 million Filipinos are estimated to have died during the war. Through those years, the bravery of Filipino soldiers and civilians alike demonstrated unyielding resolve in the face of cruelty, proving again the depth of their commitment to freedom and country. After gaining full independence in 1946, the Philippines faced new challenges that required its military to shift from defending against foreign invasion to addressing internal threats. One of the first major post-war conflicts was against the Hukbalahap movement, originally an anti-Japanese guerrilla group that evolved into a communist rebellion demanding land reform and social justice. The Armed Forces of the Philippines, AFP, launched major operations to dismantle the insurgency, which saw periods of both heavy fighting and attempts at negotiation. Though the rebellion was largely suppressed in the 1950s, communist ideology continued to influence armed resistance through the formation of the New People's Army (NPA) in 1969, which remains active in some regions. That at the same time, unrest in the southern Philippines grew. Muslim separatist groups, like the Moro National Liberation Front (MNLF), and later the Moro Islamic Liberation Front (MILF), sought autonomy or independence for the Moro people. Citing centuries of marginalization, the AFP conducted long and difficult campaigns in Mindanao, leading to civilian displacement, casualties, and efforts at peace that came and went over decades. Alongside these major threats, the rise of extremist groups such as Abu Sayyaf in the 1990s introduced new dangers, including kidnappings, bombings, and links to international terrorism. These conflicts forced the AFP to evolve, not only in tactics, but in mission. Soldiers were trained not only to fight, but also to engage communities, gather intelligence, and aid in development efforts. Civil-military operations became critical, particularly in isolated and conflict-prone areas. Throughout these decades, the military also took part in responding to natural disasters, coups, and maintaining public order during political instability. These long-running internal conflicts tested the AFP's endurance, shaping it into a force that had to balance traditional combat roles with nation-building, peacekeeping, and protecting the fragile unity of a diverse nation. In the modern era, the Armed Forces of the Philippines (AFP) have continued to evolve, facing both traditional and non-traditional challenges. With internal insurgencies still active in rural areas, the military has adopted a more holistic approach by combining combat operations with programs aimed at promoting peace and development. This includes community outreach, infrastructure support, and partnerships with local governments to prevent conflict by addressing root causes like poverty and lack of education. The AFP's role has also grown significantly in humanitarian efforts, particularly in response to natural disasters. In a country frequently hit by typhoons, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions, soldiers often serve as first responders, conducting rescue operations, delivering relief goods, and helping rebuild communities. The military's modernization program, which began in earnest in the 1990s but accelerated in recent years, has introduced new equipment, aircraft, naval vessels, and cyber capabilities. This shift is particularly relevant as tensions rise in the West Philippine Sea, where the AFP plays a crucial role in defending territorial waters and asserting sovereignty amid increasing maritime pressure. Filipino Marines and Coast Guard units are regularly deployed to remote islands and shoals, where they maintain outposts and monitor foreign activity. In addition, the AFP participates in international peacekeeping missions under the United Nations, sending troops to conflict zones in Africa and the Middle East to assist in global security and humanitarian work. Training with allied countries, such as the United States, Australia, and Japan, has improved the AFP's interoperability and defense readiness. These exercises focus on joint operations, disaster response, and maritime security. Despite limited resources compared to larger nations, the AFP has earned recognition for its resilience, professionalism, and adaptability. Today's Filipino soldier serves not only as a defender of the nation's borders but also as a symbol of stability, service, and sacrifice in a rapidly changing world. The history of the Philippines military is not just a story of war. It is a story of a nation constantly rising, adapting, and protecting what it holds dear. From ancient warriors defending their land with spears, to revolutionaries who fought for freedom, to modern soldiers securing peace and helping in times of disaster, every chapter reveals a deep love for country and people. Through foreign invasions, brutal occupations, internal conflicts, and shifting global challenges, the Filipino spirit has remained unshaken. The armed forces of the Philippines, shaped by centuries of struggle and service, stand today not just as warriors, but as guardians of unity, resilience, and hope. In remembering their journey, we remember who we are, a nation that never gives up, no matter how difficult the battle.